podcast. So let's get started. Thank you for joining us and for sharing some time this evening. I'll just do a bit of an introduction and explain what we're going to cover. And then I'll let Amelia introduce herself and we can kick off. This is an exciting time, I think, for you guys as you get coming up on nearly halfway through your F2 year. It's also quite a momentous day today because it's the day that most specialty training applications open. So you've got about a month or so to make a decision for sure on whether you're going to at least apply for a training program or not, and definitely have an F3 year. And it's great to see so many of you registering who are kind of eager to start the process of planning for an F2 year. And we hope we can really help kick off that planning process with you today. We've got a session planned that will help you answer a few, I think, quite important questions. Firstly, whether an F3 year is right for you. I can see from the poll about 75% of people, 74% have said you definitely want to take an F3 year, and only 21% saying you're on the fence, which, given that you're keen to devote an hour of your evening in November to planning your F3, tells me that you're probably pretty keen on the idea. So those results are not too surprising. So whether an F3 year is right for you, what you want to get out of it, and what some of your goals might be for that year, and being quite structured about that. And then start thinking about what your options might be, which I think is probably the thing that's most exciting for people, and how to start the planning process. We want a really interactive session. In the same section that you saw the poll, you can also ask questions. So we'll do as much Q&A as we can. The questions are all private, so they come into Amelia and I, but they're not shared with any of the other attendees. You can ask whatever you like, and we'll, as we go through the session, we'll pick out any relevant questions and share those anonymously with everyone, and try our best to answer them. And yeah, hope you have a good session. If you have to drop out, I know it's normally at this time people might be in the hospital or whatever, and you might get called away. That's fine. We are recording this, and we'll send a recording around to everyone afterwards. We sent out about 150 copies of the workbook that we're working on today. If you got one of those, obviously try and have it handy. But I have got a digital version that I'll share as we're speaking as well, because not everybody got one. And let's get started. So Amelia recently joined the Mestley team. She's in her F5 year. That's the thing. I don't know when you're supposed to stop counting, but her third year, let's say, after foundation training. And she's a really great advocate for doctors having flexible and fulfilling careers. And she's designed the exercise that we're working through tonight. So to kick us off, Amelia, it'd be great just to get a bit of a summary of what you've spent your time doing since you finished F2.
Yeah, sure. So hi, everybody. I'm Amelia. As Chris said, I'm in my F5 year. My original F3 plans were changed because of the pandemic. So since leaving foundation training, I've done pretty much everything under the sun that is an option for an out-of-training doctor to do. So I've lazed around on the beach. I've done locuming through a staff bank. I've done locuming through an agency. I've worked as a clinical fellow. I've worked in non-medical roles as well. So yeah, I've done a bit of a balance of everything. And I've made loads of mistakes as well. So that was, I think, one of the reasons Chris wanted me to do this with all of you, is because I've definitely learned from my mistakes and want to share what went well and what I learned from my experiences with my F3, 4, 5.
And I said before that you're an advocate for doctors taking time out of training. I know we've spoken about it before. You've been very passionate about that. Why do you think that time out of such a structured environment and the sort of treadmill that we often call it of training is so important for doctors?
I think it's so important because the kind of people that get into medicine, when you're applying for medical school, you're kind of this multifaceted person with lots of hobbies and interests, and you get an interview and you get in because you have all these extracurricular things that you're really interested in. And then as you move through your medical career, your time gets used up, and all these other areas of you kind of get worn away. And I found personally through foundation training, and I know a lot of my peers did as well, that they didn't feel like themselves. They thought they'd lost something of themselves. And I think that taking some time out of training to rebalance the scales and reassess all these different areas of your life that make you you and make you a really kind of robust and dynamic and multi-dimensional person, I think that's really important to do. So I really advocate for that. And I think as well, stepping off that treadmill, it's something that doctors don't often do. Like, we've never really had to apply for a job before. We've never really had to interview for stuff. Kind of once you get into medical school, your life is basically set through to consultant, and you can see a definitive future. But taking some time out, you're taking control, and you can adapt and try things that you've never kind of experienced before, and experiment. And it's, I think, really exciting, a really nice opportunity that you don't get otherwise.
And what was your decision-making process? If you go back to, a few years ago when you were halfway through your, or not even halfway through your F2 year, what was your thinking process around deciding if an F3 year was maybe the right thing for you? Like, what were your thoughts at the time?
So I think I always, in the back of my mind, knew that I was going to do an F3, and I one of the mistakes I made is I didn't plan what I was going to do. I intuitively knew that I needed a break. I needed some time out. I needed to reconnect with the different parts of me. And there was several kind of things about a medical career that really irked me, things that were making me physically unwell. You know, I was suffering from burnout. I was suffering from stress. And those things were presenting as physical kind of manifestations of stress. And I was going to my GP, and I was really sick and being referred to all these specialists. And I was telling you the other day that as soon as I started F3, all of those symptoms went away. And I hadn't realized how significantly my body was reacting to that stress. And I felt quite foolish that I'd talked to my patients about, like, oh, you must take care of yourself. You must drink enough water and get enough sleep and eat healthy. And then I was going on to night shifts and, working all night, sleeping all day, eating a Mars bar because I'd forgotten to pack a lunch. And it was really awful for my health. And I didn't realize, I knew something was wrong. And I didn't realize what it was until I started F3, and all the stress kind of melted away and I felt like myself again.
Yeah. I think from the doctors that we've spoken to at Mesty, that's probably quite common, I think. And obviously, maybe different people have those symptoms in different severity, but it's quite alarming, to be honest, how commonly we hear that from doctors that are only just over a year into their careers. And actually, it's I'm going to bring up the first part of the workbook that I wanted to share with people. I'll just skip through the first few pages and go to this, because what you've raised here is your primary reason for taking F3. I'm just going to talk through these quite quickly, and then I've got another poll to share with people. So from asking, over the last 4 or 5 years, thousands of F2s at the time who were planning F3 years, what their reasons were, we've put them into 4 pretty broad buckets, and I'm sure there may be other reasons as well. But I think for 90% of people, their reasons why an F3 year might be something that they want to take would fall into one of them. So broadening your medical experience, so that could be a frustration that you didn't get to rotate through a specialty that you thought you might be interested in, or maybe you didn't get sufficient opportunity in an area, or you just got an itch to scratch. An F3 year is a really good opportunity for that. I know through COVID, that was a massive issue with people whose rotations were heavily disrupted. So that can be locuming and using the flexibility of locuming to try different things, or doing a fellowship in an area that you might be really interested in. Recharging your batteries, which, you know, maybe sounds more positive than overcoming some stress or mental health issues, and using again the flexibility to do that. Seeking adventure and excitement, so it's very common for doctors to go off to Australia especially, but New Zealand as well, or volunteer, and we'll go through all the various options and permutations later, but that's one big category. And then exploring alternative options and careers, trying something new and different. It could be something adjacent to medicine, outside of medicine entirely, or anything in between. So before we get on to our next or first exercise, I'm going to share another poll with people. So what is your main, at the moment, and obviously this can change, what would be your main reason to take an F3 year? So just running through those 4 that we've got on the screen. And I'll wait a little while for those to come through. Actually, we'll do the exercise first, and then we'll revisit the answers to the poll. So I'll just flick this up on screen here. We've called it, or Amelia's called it, the fulfillment meter. Do you want to run through how that works? And then I know you've done a worked example, so you can show
Sure, yeah. So the fulfillment meter is an exercise that helps you kind of deep dive into yourself and audit different areas of your life and measure how fulfilled or how satisfied you're feeling in those different domains in your life. You know, there's 4 reasons that you gave before about why people tend to take an F3 year. You might really feel very committed to one of those things, or you might feel like it's a balance of all of them and not really be able to identify one particular thing that would make you feel like your F3 was worthwhile. You know, maybe you want to explore a bit of a career, seek adventure, take a bit of a break. But if you do this fulfillment meter, what you can do is you can look at any particular aspect of your life and say, yes, this is something really important that I need to focus on in my F3 because it's really, you know, not meeting my needs at the moment. So yes, I did a worked example. I've colored it in 2 different colors. So the green color is how I felt in F2, and the blue color is how I feel now. And actually, it was a really interesting exercise for me to do, because comparing what I was getting out of F2 versus what I'm getting now, some things have drastically improved and some things have stayed kind of the same. And it's about assessing how I feel about that. Do I need to invest more of my time now as a non-trainee in the areas where I haven't seen as big of an improvement as I would hope, or do I actually feel really fulfilled in the other areas and that's good enough for me? So the green is me in F2. The blue is me now. So in F2, I don't think I had enough time for my fun recreation activities. You know, working shift patterns and particularly working during the pandemic made it almost impossible to enjoy my life. My life was work, sleep, and commuting. That was it. And when I started F3, I made a commitment to myself to invest more time in fun and recreation. And I feel like that was a very valid thing to do. Yeah, relationships, you know, when you're just sleeping and spending all your time at work, you know, you're perhaps not investing as much time with your friends or with your family or in your relationships that you want. So I found that really helped, you know, going from F2 to a non-trainee.
Yeah. I think, you know, if people are really feeling like it's very obvious to them that the health side or the relationship side is not where they want it to be, that might be quite easy to diagnose potentially if you stop and think about it. But, you know, what potentially is a bit more difficult is weighing up things like professional development, and, you know, especially in the context of feeling quite burnt out at work, it might be quite difficult to get excited about becoming an amazing doctor, and weighing that against financial goals, and other sort of broader personal development goals. So I think, you know, you said before, it's something that you should revisit quite regularly, almost as like a sort of audit that you do every few months or something.
Also, you know, with finances, for example, as a trainee, you'll have a regular salary. as a locum, you'll have an irregular salary, but you might be earning a lot more. And someone might attribute a higher personal value to having a lower regular salary because they find that less stressful, whereas someone else might find, higher income more fulfilling. So it's about really reflecting on how you feel. No two people are going to judge the same thing the same way.
Yeah, sure. If I just jump back a page here, so just looking at the poll, it's really interesting. So yeah, pretty even split, to be honest, between those four, which is interesting. I thought recharging your batteries would actually be kind of the clear winner, maybe, and then the other three more even, but actually it is the biggest, but only by a handful of percentage points, which I think is really interesting. And that's the joy of an F3 year. I think it can be many things, because it is so flexible and you can do with it, pretty much what you want. And actually, what we often find is that people will hit different objectives in different ways, maybe, or at different times. So, it's quite common for people to finish F2 in August and then maybe do some locum work and not much else, which is primarily about recharging batteries, and then go, okay, now I think I want to, hit some other goals, and maybe I want to do something a bit more fun and exciting. And then that's, a lot of the jobs in Australia start in February, which is, 6 months after you finished F2. And you can see there's a bit of a kind of pattern there that we see quite often. Cool. Okay, so that's the first exercise for you guys to think about. Maybe, as I said, maybe come back to periodically as you get closer to August. Next, we're going to talk about boundaries and goals. So in the thought process, you've decided that an F3 year is right for you. 75% of you said you're definitely taking an F3, quite a long way out. So definitely in that mind, you've got some ideas around the reasons why you've taken one, and the sort of broad kind of reason for it. The next exercise we call boundaries and goals, which is sort of the next stage in the planning process. Do you want to talk through that, Amelia, and how that works?
Sure. So, so the exercise boundaries and goals is again, it's something that you can only define with yourself. So it's kind of prompting you to deep dive into what is it that is not working, or what is it that you really need from this job in order to make it sustainable. So boundaries, as it says on the page, boundaries are things that you must do, you have to do, you cannot live without, or you absolutely won't do. You're drawing a line, you don't cross it. This is it. If someone's going to ask you to do this, no, sorry, I don't do that. So the boundaries that you can define for yourself, they can be personal, professional, geographical, financial. There's probably other ones like spiritual, but we haven't included it on the worksheet. But for example, my boundaries during F2, I was really struggling with night shifts. I was struggling with weekends. They were making me feel unwell at work. They were affecting my ability to do things I enjoyed outside of work. So my personal boundary for F3 is I said I'm only going to work social hours, so 9 to 5, Monday to Friday. I'm not going to spend my nights or my weekends working as a locum. So that would be an example of a personal boundary. I find my sleep very sacred, and that was important to me, and I don't cross it. And I haven't, actually, since in the 3 years I've been out. I haven't crossed it. Professional boundary. So professional boundary is kind of like I must remain accredited with GMC, which means I must do an appraisal. So I must get CPD points in order to pass my appraisal. And that's a non-negotiable. Financial, a boundary might be I must earn enough to pay my mortgage. I must earn enough to go on this big trip I want to go on. And geographical, for me, it was I must live in my home. My partner and I have just bought a home. I want to live in that home. I've tried locum shifts where I go away for a week and work somewhere else and then come back, and that just wasn't working for me. I found that not very fulfilling, so I made that a boundary, and I've not had to cross that since I made that a boundary.
And how do you know if these boundaries are realistic? Because it's easy to sit and say, I'm not going to do this travel and I'm going to earn this much money, but how do you get some advice on whether these boundaries are realistic or not?
That's a really good question. So you'll kind of get natural feedback on whether that's a realistic boundary or not as to whether or not you're getting any work. You might say, I want to earn 10K a day and I won't take a job that doesn't give me that. And if no one's offering you that job, it means that job's not available. You might have to reconsider your boundaries. And if you're finding that you're not getting the work that you want to get with those boundaries in place, when you reconsider them, try and differentiate between whether it's a boundary or if it's a goal. So with a financial one, for example, if I say I must earn enough to pay my mortgage versus I want to earn enough to renovate my home, the renovation is a bit of a stretch goal. So I want that. I don't need that. I need to pay my mortgage. I want to renovate my home. So goal is things that you aspire to attain, things that would make you feel proud to have, things that you'd like to achieve or want to try in your life. So, for a personal goal, I really want to improve my surfing. That's really important to me. I live in Cornwall, you know what it's like, Chris. And this is just, I'm living my life. My life is more than just my job. I want to be able to do that. But if I take a series of shifts where, I'm back home after dark and I go surfing that day, it's not going to ruin my career. It's not a boundary, it's a goal.
Yeah, I think that distinction is really, really important. And again, this is a dynamic that will change, I think. As you go through your F3 year, you might think that your boundaries change. There might be some things that you want to add to the list or take away from the list, and it's something that you can think about and revisit.
I think that's a really key point, is that all of these things are dynamic. If your personal circumstances change, if you might say, oh, my geographical goal is I want to work really close to home, and then one of your friends moves up to Scotland or something, and you're like, oh, I'd like to try and spend a bit more time up there. Those goals can change, those boundaries can change. And the great thing about being an F3 is that you're in control. You can be dynamic and you can test your boundaries. You can, test your goals and see if you want to push yourself a bit further or rein things in a little bit. And that's in your control. It's about being dynamic and experimenting and trying new things.
Yeah. I would say that from speaking to the current F3s, so the doctors that are a year above the people on this call, it's actually quite surprising how few people have thought this through. So we've spoken to about 2,000 of that cohort have used Messly to find locum work from August, using our locum finding service. And when we speak to people and onboard them on there, we'll ask, what are your goals for locuming, and you have a wish list which says what rate you want and how far you're prepared to travel, etc. And people really struggle to fill that in. I think they haven't thought what they want to what they want to achieve. And then you're kind of at the whim, I think, of you take shifts because you get what you're given. You don't really have a strong view on what you want, and I think that's a really bad place to start. Obviously, that's particularly within the locum context, but it could be, it doesn't matter what path you're taking.
I have to say as well, Chris, when I explored my goals and when I really defined them to myself and then shared that with my agent and with rota coordinators, I actually got more work because I was very clear and very explicit about what I wanted and what I was looking for. So then I was in the forefront of their mind when they were trying to fill that specific shift. So instead of contacting me for everything that I knew wasn't going to work, and then me having to say, no, I don't want that. When I was very clear about my boundaries and my goals with the people who were helping me book shifts, I actually got more of what I wanted, and I was able to say yes, which then to their mind was like, oh, this is someone who says yes every time.
Yeah, the locum agency people love it if you've got a plan. and you're just definitive, because they know they've got a plan to work to, and they know if they get you something that's within the boundaries that you've set, you're pretty likely to take it, rather than sort of shooting at a kind of moving goalposts, or something that's pretty unclear. I think it's the same, if you're looking at fellowships, there's so many. Which you're going to apply for? What are your sort of criteria? Would you do something far away from home? Are you quite flexible on the specialty, or you're quite specific? We're doing a lot of work on helping doctors move to Australia at the moment, and people will say, "Oh, I don't really care which city I'm in or what specialty I work in," which again doesn't feel like a really structured way to go about it. Okay, so that's boundaries and goals. The next page in the workbook, there's a series of prompts here that we've written, idea starters, I guess, some of the obvious things around commuting times and earning money, and some of the more personal and professional goals as well. So yeah, you guys should, when you have some time, have a look at that and see if you can come up with a sort of first version of your boundaries and your goals, which I think is really important. I'm going to go on to the next section, which is about options. So once you've defined what your goals and boundaries and goals are, you've then got a good framework to start evaluating different options. Before we go on to that, I'm just going to ask a slightly off-topic question, but it's come up a lot in the Q&A. So it's obviously on people's mind, which is about appraisals and keeping GMC licenses, etc. You mentioned, Amelia, maybe not doing very much clinical work and what the consequences are. So maybe I'll ask you one question to start, and then a follow-up. So if you did very little clinical work in your F3, or maybe none at all, what might the consequences be for your license? Would you have to give up your license? And what's the sort of minimum that you might have to do?
So I didn't do an appraisal in my F3 year. When I was in F2, I'd made a plan for my F3, which I don't know if I've actually ever told you this, Chris. I was going to walk from the top of the North Island to the bottom of the South Island of New Zealand, and I'd been training for that in my F2. All my free time that I had, I was walking up and down hills. And then the pandemic happened, and they shut their borders, and I had no plan. I had nothing to fall back on. I had done no applications. I hadn't set up any clinical fellowship jobs. And so I did very, very little locum work in my F3 year. I didn't do an appraisal. And then for my F4 year, I got a clinical fellowship role, and I did an appraisal that year. Every appraiser is different. An appraisal isn't a pass-fail kind of thing. It's more about looking at what you've achieved and where you need to grow. And the appraisal is meant to be a very positive meeting to support you in your 5-yearly revalidation. So you can get away with not having an appraisal, particularly if you are going into, if you know that you're going into specialty training the next year. Some people kind of get away with it. I got away with it because I did a clinical fellowship that I really threw myself into all of that appraisal stuff and the learning and the CPD, and that's how I got away with it. But I think if you want to take time off, and don't think about your appraisal for the time that you're on holiday, but perhaps plan to do one, and at least think about doing a proportionate amount of appraisal work to the amount of locuming or clinical fellow or trust grade that you are doing when you are working. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I think there's some confusion. Some people think that appraisals are mandatory and that you'll get your license will be revoked if you don't have evidence of one, which isn't true. But you also can't go 3 years without having done any CPD or having had an appraisal either, because that 5-year revalidation will come at the end of your F5 year.
So appraisals are really complicated and scary topic. I know that we've got a lot of stuff about it on the Academy and some blogs about it that kind of talk about what it involves, like what you have to do, and also how to organize it. So the best person to talk to you about your personal circumstances is whoever your appraiser is going to be. If you know roughly what you might, I mean, perhaps at the end of the session and as you go through your F2 year, if you kind of have a rough plan of what you're going to do in your F3 year, you might at least know who might be in charge of your appraisal, and then they can give you specific advice about what you need to do.
Yeah, I mean, if you do a fellowship, it will be the consultant usually that you're the lead consultant or the consultant that's supervising you in the fellowship. If you're locuming, the agency or bank that you do most of your work with will arrange your appraisal and give you an appraisor. If you're doing only a little bit of locum work or none at all, and you want to do an appraisal, you then have to find someone to do it, which can be a little bit more difficult. We've got 2 articles on our blog. They're 2 of the top 10 most read most months. One is, do I need an appraisal in my F3 year? We try and answer this question directly. So have a look for that. The second one is called How to Ace Your Annual Appraisal as a Locum Doctor. And that talks more around the specifics of portfolio requirements and what you should be gathering through the year in terms of evidence and CPD, and then what will actually happen in the appraisal itself, and the sort of steps to book it, etc. We'll include those 2 articles. We'll send a little summary email around afterwards. I'll include those 2 articles in there if you want to have a look at it. I think that given that it's only the start of November and you're a long way away from starting an F3 year, I wouldn't let any of this stuff put you off. Taking an F3 year used to be this kind of like slightly Wild West plan that a few renegades did. Now it's like 80% of doctors we think this year will take an F3. There's a lot of you in the same boat. You're not going to hit any like major negative consequences for anything really to do with appraisals. So don't worry about it. Okay, so just moving on and getting back on topic a little bit. I said we were going to talk about options, which I think is a lot of people, I think, tend to skip the first stuff and they don't think too much about fulfillment areas and boundaries and goals. They just go straight into like, what am I going to do? So hopefully we've given you a bit more structure around that decision. But this is maybe the most the sort of heart of the question, I guess. What are you going to be doing on whenever it is, the 3rd of August or whatever, when you don't have a job anymore, or you might not have a job anymore, and what you're going to be doing. So do you want to talk through some of the stuff we've got here, Amelia, and how people might start thinking about it?
This part of the workbook is kind of opening your mind to everything that's available. And I think the first part is very important for understanding yourself. The first part of the workbook is knowing what areas you need to grow in and you want to grow in to feel like a fully developed person who's confident and competent and successful and fulfilled. And this part of the workbook is how you're going to achieve those feelings in yourself. And I find this bit really exciting because people perhaps don't realize how diverse your options are for F3. And as you said, Chris, we expect 80% of F2 doctors to be taking an F3 this year, and that's been going up year on year, every year. And every new F3 that takes a year out means that there's someone doing something totally unique for an F3 year. So you're kind of building all these stories of people who've done something really cool and exciting in their F3 year. And people don't realize just what options are out there. So the key to nailing what you're going to do with your F3 is understanding what you need from your F3. So if you were looking for excitement, there are definitely like exciting things. You can work with HEMS. If you're looking for routine, you might be looking for a more structured job like a clinical fellowship. You might be really wanting to develop your teaching skills or your learning. You might want to work on the front lines or do some research behind the scenes. You might want to earn like a bucket load of money. That's fine. You know, there are so many different things you can do, and this is the really exciting part. So the exercises coming up, I would just urge you to don't overthink it. base it on how you are feeling now as an F2, you know, what instinctually excites you, you know, what was it about medicine that kind of lit the fire for you, and what are the things that you instinctually feel you need more of or less of. So this exercise, it's by no means an exhaustive list, but if you kind of go down the left column and then the right column, you've got things that are quite conventional medical roles, so they might not be that far removed from what you're doing as an F2. Further down, it's kind of more adventurous things, so things that are still medical, still clinical medicine, just in not a hospital environment, but might be very recognizable as an F2 kind of job, kind of skills that you're doing and knowledge that you have. Medical adjacent is we're kind of moving into kind of more creative work. So you're using your medical knowledge, but you're not at all in a clinical environment. So, you know, medical writing, medical tech, what, you know, Mesli does. Medical legal hires a lot of doctors. Pharmaceutical industry hires a lot of doctors. And then as you move down, you've got non-medical. So those are jobs that might use your knowledge and experience and your transferable skills, like your lateral thinking and your ability to problem solve and your ability to manage stressful situations and write well. And then underneath that, you've got the time out, the holiday, doing something totally different.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a really good structure. I've just shared another poll actually. You can only pick one, which is a bit odd, because I think you might want to try a bunch of different things.
Yeah. So when I did this exercise, I ticked almost every box. I don't know if you can see. I ticked a lot of them. There's so many different exciting things, and this is just kind of scratching the surface of what's possible. I mean, even within a clinical fellowship, it's so diverse what you can do in a clinical fellowship. You could do teaching or research or simulation training or surgery, and you know, you can design your own clinical fellowship. So it's really exciting.
Yeah, I think to give people an idea of some data for what it's worth, we think that between 80 and 90% of doctors will pick one of fellowship, locum, or working abroad. And so, I mean, that shouldn't put you off from doing one of the, 100 things that fall into the last 10%, but those are the three most well-trodden paths for people. It's interesting because that's pretty much showing up in the poll. So just under 50% locum, a quarter clinical fellow, 15% Australia, New Zealand, or something else abroad, which takes you to about 90%. And then there's sort of a long tail of miscellaneous other amazing things, which I think depend on having a really strong interest in that area, maybe. And you have to kind of work a bit harder, I think, to seek them out. Finding there's a well-trodden path to finding fellowships, locums, and Australia, etc. But it's a bit more unique to find some of that other stuff. But hopefully that won't put you off if you've got a real interest in medical writing or something. It's certainly possible to go and seek that stuff out.
So excited for that 6% who have no idea, because that's what F3 is all about. It's kind of, I know I don't want to go into training right away, and I have the ability to try everything. You can do a bit of everything, which is really great.
Yeah, I think so. And if you guys have questions on the sort of specifics around finding fellowships and the application process and all of the ins and outs of locum work and pay and finding an agency and all that stuff, we can cover some of those now, but what we're actually planning on doing is having a series of sessions sort of in the run up to Christmas and beyond that sort of deep dive into each one of those. Where we'll do a whole session around, say, locuming or whatever, or moving to Australia, and try and cover that in some detail. It might be that maybe post Christmas you've made a decision in your head about particularly wanting to do one of those things, and you want to narrow down, and that's the time to start thinking more specifically about preparing and the process of finding work, etc. Okay, the next exercise, which we call This or That, is a sort of a continuation, really, and it's meant to be a bit of a idea starter for people that are a bit unsure of what the best option might be and how to think about that. Do you want to talk through how that one works?
My advice for this one is just really be instinctual. Don't sit and ponder it for too long, but based on how you are feeling in an F2 role, do you want more of something, less of something, bit of a change, bit of behind the scenes, frontline, but really kind of instinctual reactions. Don't spend more than what you'd spend scrolling through Instagram on each one. And if you're stuck, if you want, I want money and experience, just highlight both of them, because as you see when you get to the scoring bit, it doesn't matter. You don't have to pick one or the other. You can have both in some jobs. So just be instinctual, and if you get stuck, just take both of them or neither of them. If you don't want to.
Okay.
I did mine.
Yeah, show us. You're very neat. You're much neater than I would have circled them.
But I put teaching and learning, they go hand in hand. You don't need to pick one or the other.
Yeah. And then you'll see on the next page, we sort of tried as best we could to group those together in a way. So if you see a theme, that will sort of nudge you towards one particular outcome.
So I scored mine, and there were two that I scored really highly in. And I was actually really excited to do it because there were two I scored really highly in, and when I read them, it was exactly what I had done when I got to the point in my non-training years where I felt really fulfilled. It was because I was doing those two things. So that one of them was working for a med tech company, which I do now, and working as a locum, kind of gaining some money, getting more experience. So those were the two areas where I felt really unfulfilled as a F2. And then as an F3, I tried doing one and not the other, and that didn't really work. And then I did the other and not one, and that didn't really work. And then I've come to a balance where I've got both of them going really well, and my life is going on.
Yeah, it's going okay. Yeah. And I'd say to people, don't worry, if you're looking back at this list and you're just not really sure, I think that's quite common. As we keep saying, there's a long way to go before you have to start actually applying for anything or making any decisions. And it might be that you're so kind of in the trenches of your current rotation, you haven't really got the headspace to think about it. And I think that's normal. It might be that your views change. You might, you might go through changeover that's coming up and have a completely different view on how much patient contact you want. You might want to kind of completely back away from doing lots of hospital work, and that's fine as well. We'll go on to a timeline and briefly in a second. But there's quite an extended period of research and planning before really in the spring you have to start kind of putting pen to paper on applications and stuff like that. So yeah, you guys are ahead of the game, which is good. Okay, the last section, which we're only going to cover quite briefly, is getting organized. And on the following page, there's a sort of timeline. I think, as I said, I can just jump to that quickly. The stuff that we've put in there for, October, November, December is all, and March is all pretty much research level stuff, thinking about what your options might be. If you guys want some sort of milestones, so if you're dead set on locuming, which as it stands, about half of you are, the best time to start joining locum agencies and registering with banks is sort of April, May time. Any earlier than that, and they won't know what work they have for you, and you won't really might not know where you want to be living. You might not know what specialties you want to locum in. So it's just too soon. Our locum finding service only opens for F2s around April, May of before August of your F2 year. So that's when that starts. Someone's asked a really good question about if I want to locum, what can I be doing in my F2 year to get ready? Which I I answered and then realized it was a private answer, so no one can see it. So I'll link that article as well in the email we send afterwards. But it's things like getting your CV ready, thinking about who your referees might be, picking up some ad hoc shifts in your in your current department to say that you've done a bit of extra locum work, and thinking about things that you can put on your CV, any courses that you might want to do and things like that. So I'll send that around. That's something to be thinking about if you want to locum. For fellowships, the jobs come out, I think, in May, June. So beyond sort of planning and research and coming to webinars like this, there's not a huge amount you can do really until then. And then for Australia, so there's basically 2 times of the year that most doctors go to Australia from the UK, August and February. For August applications, you want to be applying in February, March time, and it takes 3 or 4 months to get visas and registrations sorted, etc. So that's a bit earlier. You want to be thinking about that. We've actually got a team of 15 British doctors who are in Australia working on about 100. I think there's going to be articles about moving to Australia that are all going to be published soon. So look out for those if Australia's on your list. If you think you might want to go in February, so halfway through your F3 year, you don't have to apply until September or October. Someone's asked about an F3 in Sweden. I don't know anyone that's done an F3 in Sweden. So you might be a bit of a trailblazer there, but that sounds exciting. Maybe you could pick this one up, Amelia. Are there any opportunities for part-time fellowships? Personally, I would like some structure, but also need a rest.
Yeah, so I think people don't realize how much power you have when negotiating roles and trust grade roles and fellowship roles. If there's a fellowship available and you can go and interview for it and you can apply for the job, and then once you get the job, you can absolutely negotiate, or even before you get the job, you can go up front and say, yes, I'm here to help and I'm available this many days a week. There's definitely options for you, and you definitely have a lot of power in negotiating, because if you think about, as an F2, how many holes are there in your rota? How much money is the hospital spending hiring locums in? The hospital would much rather hire in a clinical fellow or a trust grade doctor to fill that role, because they don't have to pay them a locum rate, and they get someone guaranteed for a certain amount of time, whether it's a six month or a 12-month fellowship. So the hospital would much rather do that. And you don't even have to apply for an existing fellowship. If you know what you want to do, if you want a part-time fellowship in elderly care, I can guarantee you there will be a consultant on an elderly care ward who could use an extra doctor 2 days a week and is willing to be your supervisor for that. Yeah. The benefit of being a clinical fellow is you probably also get a study allowance and study days, and you can attend teaching and stuff. So yeah, definitely there's options for part-time. You just have to use your power, your negotiating power. My clinical fellowship job that I did didn't exist. They were advertising for a registrar role that I really was not qualified to do. And I just thought, what if I'm just really arrogant and I just call them up and say, look, I'm not qualified, but I'd be really interested in doing this job. And that's what I did. I called the chief executive of the trust and I said, look, I'm interested in this job. I'm not a registrar. Would you be interested in hiring me at my grade? And they found the funding and they hired both of us. So it worked really well. I got to kind of name my terms, and the hospitals actually, I think they realize how many people are taking time out of training, and they have this huge gap and they don't know what to do, because doctors are taking back control and kind of coming to the other side saying, what can you offer me? This is what I'm willing to help you with. Yeah. I'm here to support you, and I'd love to join your team, but this is my boundaries. This is what I'll take. And they're really receptive, actually.
Yeah, there's lots of questions, along the lines of, am I allowed to do this? And that's am I allowed to do part-time? Am I allowed to And we really want people to feel empowered. That, you know, that language, I think, is being allowed to do one thing or another is language that's from a foundation program or from a specialty training program. You're allowed to do whatever you want. You can do, you know, call up the hospital and tell, hey, I only want to work every other Friday. And they'll probably say, well, that's great. I mean, we wish we'd have you 5 days a week, but if that's all you're prepared to offer, then we'll take it. You know, so yeah, you should really feel empowered. Someone's asked, well, there's actually quite a few, I'd say quite niche questions similar to the Sweden one. Someone's asked about going to Zimbabwe or Tanzania or going to France. Those are, I'd say, quite unusual, which is difficult for us to have good advice on all of those things. I'd say a good resource is Facebook. There's the Foundation Year 3 Doctors Group. We've got about 6,500 doctors in there. That's probably your best bet, finding someone that's trodden that path before you. Or alternatively, there's a group called Alternative Careers for Doctors, I think it's called. That's massive. It's a bit of an echo chamber, and there's a few people in there that are quite vocal, that are quite sour on the future of the profession. But there are also really helpful people in there that have done, you know, as the name suggests, alternative, really weird and wonderful things. So those two communities are quite good places to go if you think you're going to do something.
The other thing I'd say is you can work with an NGO. As long as you can get medical protection, so your medical legal defense, you can work with an NGO. I have a friend who worked in Calais at a refugee camp. It's definitely something you can do. So if you know you want to go to a particular place, find an organization that works there or hires doctors there and talk to them, see how other doctors, you know, try and get in touch with other doctors who've done the same thing.
Yeah, great. I'll take a couple of questions on locuming. So is locuming becoming more competitive as more people take F3s? The joy of that is when you take an F3 year, you create your own gap effectively. So the more people take F3s and want to locum, the more locums there are, but there are also proportionately just as many gaps. So yeah, the number of people locuming in their F3 has doubled in the last 5 years, but there's still just as much work. If you're worried about locuming, and obviously the biggest risk of that is the financial uncertainty, there's an abundance of work. There has been even before COVID, during COVID, and now. If you've got reasonable expectations of the rate that you'll earn and a little bit of flexibility, you know, around travel and stuff, there's an abundance of work. If you want to work through locum agencies, they'll have loads of work for you. If you want to work through the bank that you did your F2 in, they'll have loads of work for you too. I don't think anyone should be put off by the fear of you know, of not being able to pay the rent. Obviously, the benefit of locuming, because it's quite lucrative, you can earn your F2 salary in less than 2 days a week, just on sort of general SHO rates, nothing crazy, not like, you know, super escalated, just the normal, you know, 40, 42, something like that pounds an hour. So you don't need loads and loads of work to be able to give yourself the same financial position that you're in at the moment. And then you have 3 days a week to.
The other thing you can do, if you're worried that you might not get locum work, if you're happy to kind of stay in the trust that you're working and you know your rota coordinators, once people have applied for their specialty training and the rota coordinators know what gaps they're going to have, they'll be looking to hire clinical fellows or trust grades for the roles that are empty. Mm-hmm. And a lot of those trust grade and clinical fellow positions don't get filled. So you can then go to the rota coordinator and say, if you don't fill this position, I'll take that rota line at locum pay. And for them, it guarantees that, you know, you're going to fill all of those empty shifts, but also you're getting a locum rate. And as a locum, you can opt out of shifts that you don't want. And it doesn't, you know, it's not like you have to request holiday. You can just say, no, I'm not doing that shift.
Yeah, that's great. A couple of questions about visas. So if you're currently on a skilled worker visa, what used to be called a tier 2 visa, that visa is tied to your job in the hospital, so or your foundation training. So if you left that, you then wouldn't have a visa, and then wouldn't be able to work. So if you are in that position and you don't want to apply for training, you would need to find a post that would be prepared to sponsor you, which would probably be a trust grade job or a fellowship role, of which there are a lot, and I think you still have a lot of choice. But because of that visa constraint, you don't have the sort of ultimate flexibility of locuming where you can work a shift here and there. If you are on one of those visas, you can locum as well. So you could do some people will do a part-time trust grade or fellowship role and then locum outside of that, or locum at the weekend or on their annual leave as well if they're doing a full-time job. So you can locum, but you do need your visa is tied to a specific job, which you'll need to have. Okay. Question here: if you're using F3 to make your specialty application better, is it okay to apply for that specialty in F3 even if you haven't had most of that experience yet? So the issue is you'd be applying about now, which is only sort of 3 or 4 months into that year. What do you think about that one, Amelia?
Yeah, I mean, it's no different from someone applying for a specialty in F2 that they haven't, if you have, if you want to do, apply for A&E training and your A&E block is at the end of F2, you won't be getting that experience when you send in your F2 application. For F3, it's the same. You have to apply for your specialty training, for your, what would be your F4 year at the beginning of your F3. But if you can say, I plan on doing this, I've lined up this work, if you really want to strengthen your application, maybe a clinical fellowship. So if you can show you have a contract coming up, even if it's, a 3, 4, 6 month clinical fellowship, that's good enough. You just have to demonstrate that you are getting that experience, the same as an F2 would.
That's great. A really interesting question, actually, which doesn't come up that often, but is interesting. So I'm starting to try for a baby and plan to do some flexible locuming next year around a potential period of maternity. But I feel kind of alone. Is this an unusual thing to do? And then there's a follow-up question. I don't think it's that common, but I don't think there's a good reason for that. That might just be a sort of coincidence of age, maybe, and whatever. Locuming obviously gives you good flexibility and high income. I do know quite a few doctors who are using locuming as a way to come back into the workforce after having had a baby a couple of days a week, and earning a good income despite only working a couple of days a week. Obviously, you have the flexibility in the pay, but you have much less protection around your role. So you're not entitled to maternity pay. You get the government statutory maternity pay, which frankly is not that much. Certainly not. It's not an income. I can't remember exactly how much it is, but it's
£100 a week.
Yeah, it's like, but it's pocket money, not a lot. Which you would, I think, be entitled to if you'd been in a fellowship role for a certain period of time before you went on leave. That would depend on the contract. So yeah, it's not super common, but I don't think it's something that you should be put off by. And I think, you'd have to weigh up.
I think, it's a really good time for this person to be asking this question because, specialty applications open now. You have options. So if you did apply for specialty training for next year's start, you can always defer that if you want. If you applied for a clinical fellowship, you might have some, depending on at what point in the year you get pregnant, you might have more protections, or you can locum if you feel like that gives you a bit more power and makes you feel more in control. It's absolutely fine for your appraisal. So there's several criteria for several acceptable criteria for delaying an appraisal. Sickness, maternity leave are valid reasons for not doing an appraisal. Or you can do kind of a partial appraisal. You could do one after 6 months instead of 12, and look at what you've managed to accomplish in that time instead of in the full year. So you do have a lot of options in this moment right now. I would say that if you're not sure what you're going to do over the next few years, there's no harm in applying for specialty training because you can always defer it. But if you're worried, you can always have that as a backup option.
Yeah. Would a lack of a driving license be a major issue for ability to locum? I mean, not technically. Obviously, you have to get to the shifts. So I guess depends on where you live. If you're living in London, I don't think that would be a major, or big city, that would be a major issue. Somewhere more rural. What it would do is it would just restrict the sort of geographical area that you could work in, which means if you have a boundary around that might be a little bit out of your control, and you wanted to earn a certain amount or have a certain amount of work, you might have to perhaps be a little bit more flexible in some other parts of your wish list. So you might have to maybe work in a couple of different specialties to give you enough cover if that was necessary, or be a little bit flexible around the rate that you wanted at times. And obviously you shouldn't work for less than you think you're worth, but you might have to be a little bit flexible around that, or picking up occasional weekend shifts or whatever. It's all a balance of those things really to determine.
The other thing I'd say to that person is, if you're working through an agency and you're willing to work in an area that's quite rural or less popular, your agency can negotiate with that hospital to include accommodation that's on site. So I worked as a locum in a hospital that was quite rural, and my agency was able to negotiate that for me, so I got to stay for free on site. I mean, it wasn't, quality living, but it was free and it was there. And that was quite a good option. That you don't have to pay for any kind of travel. I mean, you have to get to the place, obviously, but once you're there, you don't have to pay for any travel costs.
Yeah. Okay. There's a couple of questions about Australia, and then we might wrap up. How easy is it to get a fellowship in surgery in Australia and not just locum? So there are lots of surgery jobs in Australia. They're not called fellowships. They're called, they're just substantive posts, but they're pretty similar. And the amount of support and teaching you get is far more than here for a typical non-training, non-fellowship role. You're not actually allowed to locum in Australia for the first year, at least, that you're out there. So you start off as a British doctor, you start off on a provisional registration, which is similar to what F1s are here. Even though you're more senior, we basically have to work in one place under supervision. And then after a year, you get signed off, and you can upgrade that registration to what they call a general registration, a full registration, which allows you to locum. So it's actually really common for people to go out, do a year in one place, see if they like it. And if they do and they want to stay, then you go and locum. And the rates are insane. You can get almost £100 an hour as an SHO with travel, accommodation. They give you a car. You get like a per diem to pay for food. And you can get like a 12-week booking in some coastal hospital somewhere and earn like, what feels like a crazy amount of money. So
I've lost my best friend to Australia. She went out for F3 and never came back. So.
Yeah, it's really common. And we're doing lots of work on Australia at the moment because it's it's really popular, as you saw in the poll, but it's also it's got a whole layer of complexity, and it's so obviously far away and a bit scary. So trying to demystify that a little bit. Okay, well, thank you for your time and for oh, sorry, there's one more. How easy is it to then enter training in Australia? It's quite common. Like lots of British doctors will join the training programs are much shorter there, so it's you can CCT much more quickly, and that's often transferable back to the UK. So there's a bit of a hack. You can become a consultant like 2 years before any of your friends by doing training in Australia. So that's a cool thing to think about. Thanks for sharing your evenings with us. I hope you found it useful. As I said, we'll follow up with an email with a recording and with a copy of the workbook if you don't have one. digital copy, and some of the articles that we mentioned. And yeah, keep an eye out. We've got your email addresses, so we'll send a little newsletter the next time we're planning another session to invite you to that if you'd like to join. And yeah, hope you found it useful. Thanks, Amelia, for sharing all of your wisdom.
Thanks for having me.
And we'll see you guys soon.